The band Smash Mouth burst onto the scene with their hit song Walkin' on the Sun, and then rose to meteoric highs with their smash single All Star, but it hasn't been all rock and roll. Plenty of bands were struggling to make ends meet before they made it big, and Smash Mouth was one of them. In an interview with Rolling Stone, their manager Robert Hayes revealed, "I would go meet with them at their apartment and I would watch them scrape peanut butter out of the bottom of the jar and put it on a piece of bread just so they could eat." Lead singer Steve Harwell talked about those dismal days too, and in an interview with Vice, he revealed that he went from a comfortable middle-class upbringing to running extension cords over the roof to steal power off my neighbor's house because we couldn't pay our bills. He added that it took a few years of making connections, living off Taco Bell, and even stealing potted plants to sell for some much-needed cash to get where they wanted to be. Without those struggles, though, it's entirely possible that the world wouldn't have gotten one of their best-known lyrics. According to Greg Camp, the band's main songwriter, the famous L on the forehead lyric was based on a true story. He was in a relationship at the time, and while his significant other held down a regular job, he played gigs when he could get them, slept, and partied. Camp said, "So there was a lot of jealousy happening, and it sort of came out in the form of, 'You're a loser, dude.'" Walkin' on the Sun sent Smash Mouth into the stratosphere, and the massive hit actually added to the pressure. When Greg Camp was tasked with writing the next big hit, he said that he needed to find inspiration somewhere, and that ended up being the fans themselves. Camp told Rolling Stone that touring for their first album was hardly a glamorous affair, and he and Paul Delisle were the ones tasked with finding the local laundromats. While they were washing their clothes, they'd sit and read fan mail, and as Camp related, "We noticed that there was a common thread in all of these letters. Kids thanking us for being their band. They were sort of outcasts. They were kind of nerdy and picked on and stuff like that. Paul and I sort of verbally set out to write an anthem for them. That's how it started." It became All Star, which blossomed when Camp added ideas like a funky standout beat and his own tried and true favorite footwear, Converse All Stars. And even though the song became an anthem for sports teams everywhere, it wasn't sports fans that Camp had in mind at all. According to what Camp told WBUR, they weren't content just to write an anthem, and would always try to write back to those kids who sent them the letters saying that their music helped them get through the pain of being bullied. Fan theories tend to run from plausible to incredibly ridiculous, and surprisingly, there's a Smash Mouth fan theory that songwriter Greg Camp has confirmed is pretty accurate.
Now let's talk about the mail. Can we talk about the mail, please, Mac? I'm dying to talk about the mail with you all day, okay?
The theory says that All Star, with lyrics like, "The ice we skate is getting pretty thin, the water's getting warm, so you might as well swim. My world's on fire, how about yours?" is actually about the state of the planet, global warming, and climate change. Smash Mouth might seem like the last of the 90s, early aughts party bands to be making a political statement about climate change, but when Vice spoke with Camp, he said that yes, the news about climate change, the ozone layer, and changing emission standards had all been on his mind while he was writing, and ended up in the song. He confirmed, "It's not completely about climate change, but it has elements, or a few lines in the lyrics addressing a hole in the ozone layer and global warming." Camp, however, went on to say that he ultimately wasn't sure just how much of an impact the human race was having on the natural cycle of the planet, but added that in the end it didn't matter, saying, "Well, like most people, I'm concerned, and my family and I do our part to try to lessen the size of the footprint we leave." Getting involved in the soundtrack of Shrek seems like it would be a no-brainer, but that wasn't always the case. When Smash Mouth sat down to talk to Rolling Stone in 2019, they revealed that when they were initially approached by DreamWorks, they had absolutely no interest in signing on to have one of their biggest songs featured in a children's movie. Greg Camp explained, "When DreamWorks came to us, some of us were a little apprehensive, because once you get your song into like a family movie, you merge into this Disney zone. It's totally different now, but back then you were shooting yourself in the foot for offering your song to a commercial or television. It wasn't very cool to do back then." Shrek wasn't even the first film they'd been approached about getting involved with, and because other proposed movies they declined had ended up being flops, they were firmly of the belief that they'd done the right thing by saying no. DreamWorks didn't give up, though, and kept chasing them. Smash Mouth kept turning them down over and over again. Minds started to change when DreamWorks met with them to screen the movie, and once they realized that it was going to be a massive hit, the rest was history. Smash Mouth was at the height of their popularity in 2001, and it's also when they announced that they were canceling a handful of shows after the death of Harwell's 6-month-old son, Preston. He later spoke to the Morning Call about what happened, and it's a parent's worst nightmare. He said, "We thought he was teething. We had no idea he was sick. It all happened so quickly. I got a call in Minnesota that he had leukemia. Within a day and a half, he was gone. It was so shocking. I thought I was invincible until it happened to me. It happened to Steve Harwell, lead singer of Smash Mouth, the rock star. All the money in the world couldn't save him." Everyone grieves in different ways, and for Harwell, that meant going out, getting back on tour, and setting up the Presley Scott Research Foundation for leukemia. He felt that he needed to do something good, especially considering that in the wake of his personal tragedy, there came the national tragedy of 9/11. In an interview with MTV, he talked about how tragedy inspired him to make the music that reminded people it can't be all terrible all the time, saying, "I feel like the ones that are gone are okay, and everything's gonna be alright. It just makes you think a little bit." By 2014, Smash Mouth had seen and done it all, with a career that's enough to make any aspiring musician more than a little jealous. So when Steve Harwell sat down to talk to Vice about that career, there were a lot of highlights he had to choose from. For starters, he loved seeing the wide age range that their shows invariably attracted, from their middle-aged original fans to those who had grown up with Shrek to the children of those fans. He said it was always a high point to hear from people who had grown up with their music. Harwell said that he never got bored of playing the hits, and that the mere suggestion that he might be sick of his songs was ridiculous. And as far as career highlights, he went not with Shrek, but with another movie, Rat Race. The incredibly bizarre movie about teams racing across the country ended at a Smash Mouth concert. Harwell said, "That's probably one of the highlights of my career, getting to meet Whoopi Goldberg and John Lovitz and Cuba Gooding and Seth Green and those guys. What a great time with that cast."
Oh, this is beautiful, baby. This is beautiful. Oh! Great things happen. I don't know.
Fast forward to 2020, and Smash Mouth was in the headlines for a very divisive reason. It's no secret that opinions over COVID protocols divided the country, so when Smash Mouth took the stage at Sturgis and proclaimed, "We're all here together tonight, that COVID," it's safe to say that people either loved the sentiment or hated it. Those who hated it really hated it. Fan mail turned hate mail. Smash Mouth manager Robert Hayes reached out to Billboard amid the widespread condemnation of photos that showed a tightly packed and largely mask-free crowd, saying that what the photos didn't show were all the precautions taken backstage. Hayes said that despite the way the photos looked, the Smash Mouth organization is taking this pandemic very seriously and has taken measures to keep our band, crew, and fans as safe as possible during this time. A few months later, the consequences of Sturgis as a whole were published by the Southern Economic Journal in an article terrifyingly titled "The Contagion Externality of a Super-Spreading Event, the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally and COVID-19." The paper, which quoted Steve Harwell's oft-repeated statement on COVID, found that outside of South Dakota, the counties that had the largest number of attendees had seen a spike in COVID cases of between 6.4% and 12.5%. They described Sturgis as a hotbed of worst-case scenarios for super-spreading, which wasn't great. Anyone who even semi-regularly stopped by the internet since the late 2000s has likely seen the approximately 1,000,001 remixes, spoofs, parodies, and other sorts of videos featuring All-Star performed in increasingly bizarre ways. It'd be easy to get annoyed at what might be perceived as ridicule, and one glance at Smash Mouth's media presence might make it seem that they're incredibly bitter about the whole thing. Inverse found that they're refreshingly unique in that the band's social media is run by the actual band, not someone hired to be a behind-the-scenes media presence. Paul Delisle said that when the whole thing started, they didn't even know what a meme was, adding, "But we have never taken ourselves that seriously. We like the attention." And that extended to Harwell eventually. When all the memes and remix videos started trending, he told Polygon, "At first it was weird and we were a bit guarded and resistant, but as we dove into it more and focused on it, we started getting it. Plus, to be honest, it has really spiked sales."
The memes, Charles. You should see the memes.
And he also noted that just because they weren't participating, that wasn't a sign that they didn't approve. Harwell explained, "We feel it's best for others to do it. We've had requests, but none of them has felt right. We feel if other people do it, it adds to the beauty, but if we did it, we feel it would cheapen it." In 2021, Steve Harwell and Smash Mouth were back in the headlines for a bizarre reason. Video taken at a concert in Bethel, New York, seemed to show Harwell threatening the crowd, acting erratically, and appearing to give a Nazi salute. That concert was quickly followed by an announcement that explained that he had been struggling with some serious health issues for the previous 8 years and would be retiring. Harwell issued a statement saying, "Ever since I was a kid, I dreamed of being a rock star performing in front of sold-out arenas, and I've been so fortunate to live out that dream. I've tried so hard to power through my physical and mental health issues and to play in front of you one last time, but I just wasn't able to." Harwell was diagnosed with multiple conditions, including cardiomyopathy. The Mayo Clinic defines that as a condition that impacts the way that the heart pumps blood and can result in things like fatigue, chest pain, dizziness, bloating, rapid heartbeat, and difficulties with breathing. He was also diagnosed with Wernicke's encephalopathy. According to the National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke, it's a degenerative brain disorder caused by a lack of vitamin B1, and it's characterized by confusion, low blood pressure, a loss of coordination, a loss of memory, and the inability to retain new information and memories. It wasn't long after officially retiring and stepping down as the lead singer of the band he'd formed that Steve Harwell passed away. His death was prefaced by a 2023 announcement in which Smash Mouth representatives confirmed that Harwell had entered into hospice care. His death was announced the following day on September 4th. The official cause of death was liver failure, and a statement by the band said, "He was surrounded by family and friends and passed peacefully and comfortably." Acute liver failure, says Johns Hopkins, is rare. They note that, unlike chronic liver failure, this version happens quickly and suddenly, and in some cases, it's unclear just what the underlying cause is. Smash Mouth, it seemed, would go on. Among those who paid tribute to Harwell was Smash Mouth's new lead singer, Zach Good. Good took over when Harwell retired and said, "I love singing these songs every night and carrying on the spirit of rock and roll in front of the best fans in the world. I will continue to try in my own way to honor what Steve and the band have created.